I just want to give the audience some context.
Okay.
Ken Rudnick, your son, is the most has been the most incredible creative collaborator for me for the past 3 years, the most consistent for sure. I went on maybe like 150 drinks with people, just generals, just try to
Yeah.
kind of understand the landscape. I'm not from LA. I know you and your son are from LA.
I'm
Um,
not.
oh, you're
I'm not.
copy, but you
We'll
raised
get to that.
it. Yeah, we'll get
Yeah.
to that. We'll circle back. But yeah, I didn't know anyone here. I didn't know the business. So I was just trying to like dip my toe in the water, try to get a sense of like the grand scope of everything. And through that, most of those conversations were meaningless. But I met your son. And when it comes to writing partners, I feel like it's almost like finding a unicorn, man, because you got to find someone who you're both on the same page, you both mesh creatively.
Yeah.
How has your experience been? I would love to just hear how you found this writing partner and what your experience has been like through the years on a collaborative
So
basis.
yeah, and actually on that focus, if it makes sense and if it fits into your venue, Rich Hosek and I wrote for decades together, and we've actually recently been on podcast with a third partner, Lloyd Auerbach, who's a working parapsychologist, and he's got to be legit because he appeared on Oprah. The three of us have written a book series. Rich has done the heavy lifting of adapting a TV pilot we wrote 25 years ago called Rainy and Day, and it's been adapted into Near Death, a book which is the first in the Rainy Day investigation, and Afterlife, the second book, and we're doing the third. But that grew out of, again, these collaborations. Film, television are a collaborative process from the get-go.
Exactly.
And even if you write alone, and I know some people really revel in writers groups, and my schooling had the first example of that recently. For me, it's collaborative right down to the time a movie is released or a TV show airs and somebody watches it. And they're collaborating with the writer, not the same way a partner shares money or decisions, but if they don't get it, that's, they're part of the experience.
Right.
So I've always liked the way television is a room of people and everybody contributes and certain people get credit. Movies are collaborative. They sometimes, writers don't get the best respect on features sometimes, and they get replaced and replaced and replaced, and there's this whole try and change 30% or whatever so you can get credit. Not the secure writers, not the writers who are getting paid regardless of their screen credit, but the collaboration is absolutely a form of marriage. And you may have heard my advice, Ken's heard it forever. If you're going to collaborate with somebody, talk about the arrangement before, because if you say we'll deal with it when we're successful, you're not planning on ever being successful. Because if you don't decide who owns what, who does what if it doesn't finish, how you're going to share, and most writing partnerships by default are 50-50.
Right.
And the WGA, one of the big things, strike going on right now,
Yeah.
one of the big things they're trying to do is when you write on a team, you have to earn twice as much to get health benefits, to get qualifications, because they pay you half as a team, but you're working the same hours. And it's all numbers, but being a partner, you have to respect their talent. You have to know what they offer. You have to do what you bring to the table. You have to respect it and validate it. But if you have a project and suddenly they no longer want to write, but somebody wants it, they're going to think it's worth $1 million. And you're going to be like, they're paying us 100, and if you don't have the right to that property, it's dead. It's sterile script. And the Writers Guild, the WGA website, has sample template agreements for partners to just agree. What happens if we don't finish this? What if we get 75% there and then we put it away for a year and then I finish it on my own? Do I have the right to do that? Or what Rich Hosek and I did, we made a commitment, because I had teamed with a lot of people on different projects, and I still see value in that even more today.
Yeah.
And Rich never wrote with anybody. And when the two of us decided to write together, it was a time where, very much so in Hollywood, your identity as a brand was important. If
Mhm.
you're going after an agent, they want to know, am I representing Arnold or Rich or Arnold and Rich?
Right.
Every sample you write is a calling card for that writing entity. And so Rich and I made a commitment to focus on TV, and we did half-hour sitcoms, every show on the air specs, original pilot. We got an agent. We went to the Warner Brothers Comedy Writers Workshop as a team. We got some episodes produced, switched agents, got more stuff, switched agents. We kept writing, and that's actually when Rich and I teamed up. That was when I brought him in on that paranormal TV series that I'd already been working on with Lloyd, an amazing friend and colleague, and I met him doing research at Paramount. I'll circle back to the start because I know
Sure.
that's the genesis, but
Yeah.
a partnership, you just have to communicate, and you have to know what you expect, and you have to endure arguments, because if you feel strongly about something, you're going to argue
Right.
about it.
And that's healthy. There's like a healthy element to that too.
Right.
Right. Because
Right.
otherwise you're just keeping stuff in. And just to circle back to like what my experience has been with Ken, it's
Yeah.
essentially on my end, I tend to be more bullheaded and forward focused, and let's drill in on this one path. And he's very measured and strategic and able to
Yeah.
communicate in that way. And so it works. So I feel like you
Right.
have to have both that merging of energies in a way, and also just merging in like creative sensibilities.
Well, it goes like TV writers' rooms. You've got the person who's brilliant with jokes, and somebody else who's great with structure, and people have their talents. And when you put them together, it raises the level of the project.
Right.
And for like Rich and I, it got to the point. Probably the most concentrated writing we did was when we got staffed on the new Addams Family in
Yep.
1999, and we were writing a script every 4 days, and we were also reviewing the edit, and we were also pitching ideas for the next. So we were working on the last episode, the current episode, and the next one, and we had to divide things up, which is where they got their money's worth as a team.
Yep.
But in dividing it up, we got to the point where we could get pretty far in a pass knowing how the other one would think. So I was able to co-write with Rich, even if he wasn't sitting next to me,
Mhm.
little voice on the shoulder.
Mhm.
And like you're talking about what Ken is bringing to it, you can grow through a writing partnership. You don't need to be partners forever. But if you're only going to be partners on one project, the sheer likelihood of that one project selling and getting made is very small. The value of that one project is either the experience and what you learn
Right.
and the writing sample. And if you have a writing sample that can get a producer to say, hey, I have this book, can you look at it? Or an agent or a manager or talent. The writing sample is only a sample for the two of you. And if you're going to write one thing and they don't want to work ever again, then maybe we only have 24 hours in a day. We only have time to write X. And you said something way back that I'm going to challenge you on.
Great.
I forgot your term. You said you went on 150 drinks and most of them were wasted or not worthwhile. Nothing is ever wasted. That experience, good or bad, is growth,
Right.
fodder for future things, relationships that could come back out of the blue.
Yeah.
There are a lot of people, not just in entertainment, but in business, who gravitate to, what can you do for me? I only want to meet you if you can do something for me. And that, for my purposes, isn't the most satisfying relationship. I like people. I like learning about people. If I can be of help to them, I want to. And one of the things I've learned more, and has been reiterated even in my MFA program recently, is ask. If you need a favor for someone, ask. If they say no, they say no. But if you don't even ask, you can't even get to know.
Nothing ventured, nothing gained. Yeah.
Yeah. When Rich and I started out, we knew that the averages were you get 100, rejections.
Right.
But we played games with that. We were like, well, we're applying to this agent who is referred to us by this writer producer. So that rejection is worth 10. So then this other rejection, because these people are not cold query. I know people have done that too. They've just barraged people with the letters.
Has that worked out?
Not statistically. Of course, it's worked for some because it happens to work, and everybody has to do their own way. But if you send all those out, you have to decide, could I have been instead writing another golden spec, that is great. And there's a balance. Everybody's like, don't start pursuing agents, don't start worrying about producers until you've written it, and as if you write it, they will come. That's not going to happen. They're not going to know you exist.
Yeah.
But the whole, legacy of luck, that luck is being in the right place, but having done all your homework to be there. When you're lucky enough to be on a plane and somebody says they're looking for a project, do you have a script? Oh, I'll read it.
Right.
It
have been years in the making, horrible scripts that you wrote, but you learned something with each time, and that eventually got to that one that can actually work. Yeah. You mentioned before that you gravitated towards television. Is that because writer is more king as opposed to features?
I knew that to be the case, and I enjoyed that. Writers are very respected in TV, but it really grew up more because I grew up on TV. I mean, I loved movies. I worked at, and my wife and I met working at a movie theater, a movie palace in Central Illinois. That's now, it has been the home of the Roger Ebert Film Festival. It's an old single screen palace, and we were in the Midwest. And I knew I wanted to work in entertainment. I knew I had to be in California, but I also knew I wasn't going to leave and be able to leave till I had a college degree. So I created a major back before it was every school offered it. It was, I had to petition that all of my courses fit an educational purpose. And I created a major combining cinema and accounting. And it was 3 colleges. It was the College of Business, the College of Fine Arts, and I made movies, and that's where Rich and I met, actually. I'll circle there. And I studied cinema studies and the history of film, which is really important to know, all of those. So I created a major, and in addition to learning those 3 things, the biggest thing I learned was coordination of navigating a university and creating and getting approvals to graduate. And I found out I gave myself too many thesis term paper classes, not too many. I gave more than I needed. So I had to write these papers and do stuff. And I was like, I didn't need to do all this. I enjoyed it.
Right.
And I came out to California with my wife. We knew we were getting married, and we moved out together, loaded up a car, had a family friend to stay with for 3 days, a relative for 3 days till we found an apartment. We knew 2 people in Hollywood, and
I love that.
One of them was incredibly helpful in referring some books to read and some informational interviews. And he didn't ever give me a job, but he opened that door, and I got an interview informational with a TV producer. And she said, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "I want to work in film or TV." And one of the most important life lessons, not just for entertainment, that I pass on now, career day, anywhere. She looked at me and she said, "When you're meeting a TV producer, you want to work in TV." And I realized you're not being dishonest if you don't say everything you want to do. I do want to work in TV, and I am taking the time of a TV producer. I'm competing for a job against people who want that job. If I don't really want it, then what am I doing?
Right.
And it's a balance, because if you want it too much, you're nervous, or you don't come across who you are. But that lesson, when you're meeting a TV producer, you want to work in TV. I see that in so many other things.
Yeah.
And the other, a producer, an associate producer told me, heard this many times, many different ways: if you work at what you want to do in entertainment for 10 years, you'll be there. The number 10, I've also heard, if you want to be a writer, you've got to write 10 scripts, your 10th script. And I think it's just a placeholder.
Hmm.
But the thing is, a lot of people give up or change their mind, and there is nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
But you have to have the tenacity
Right.
to stick through, and you have to do that with anything. We don't question it with med school. You're not a doctor unless you finish med school.
For sure.
You have to finish.
Yeah.
So there is no school to be a writer, but you have to write. And the
Absolutely.
more you write, the better.
Absolutely.
Um, we found, again, we counted, every agent submission counted as 8 or 10, and every spec script counted as 3 or 4. We did sell probably before the 10. There's all the stories of the people who write the first thing and sell
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
It's damaging for a lot of people because it's not the case for most, right?
It's not always even the overnight success on general takes 3 to 5 years.
Right.
So,
And
and
sorry to interrupt. That's a great
no,
point though. The 10 scripts thing. Is there anything else that you would say to someone who's coming out to LA in order to become the best kind of writer that they can be before? Because a large part of this conversation is going to be on the business side of things. But first, talking specifically about the craft, do you feel like also reading a lot of scripts is helpful? Is there anything else that you might advise people?
you have to read a lot of scripts. I mean, I think you have to accept what the business really is, which
Right.
is kind of a paint by numbers. I mean, if you think about the old masters and they learned how to paint by looking at this, you're writing a script. There's a format to it. If you want
Yeah.
to ignore that and go all, avant garde, that's fine. But if you're breaking the rules, you need to know you're breaking them.
Right.
So you have to read scripts. You have to watch movies or watch TV. Circling back to what you said, why did I pursue TV? I grew up with TV. I grew up with episodic television, Gilligan's Island, The Brady Bunch, $6 Million Man. I love television, and I decided to be a writer because back then there was no Netflix, there was no DVDs even, and if Gilligan's Island was on and my parents wanted to leave the house, I didn't know if they were going to get rescued because I couldn't see the end of the show. So I made the end of my own shows, and they got off the island much sooner than mine. But of course, that would have ended the series. I made up my own stories, and why is Stephen King so successful? He grew up in winter. I was in the Midwest. When you have nothing else to do and are
Yeah.
snowed in, you create.
Scorsese
One,
had asthma and he was a sickly child, and he would just spend his whole childhood in the movie theater.
right,
It's in his DNA.
right. So one of the things that's different than when I came, you could not contemplate a career in film without being here. New York, Chicago had businesses. Atlanta now has it.
Right.
You can be anywhere and write
True.
and Zoom and do stuff. But still, for the most part, if you're pursuing agents and you're pursuing television and you're pursuing staffing, you have to be in LA.
Right.
So while you're getting ready to be here, you can watch television, you can get copies of scripts, you can write specs. I talk to Ken all the time because like he's more connected. He grew up here, and I'm like, are people looking for original specs? Are they only looking for pilots? And I heard 3 different things from 2 different people in my MFA program. Like, people want original voices, but the old tried and true method of watching a show, a popular show, and writing a spec for it to their format is an apprenticeship. And it's learning something that how can you write a pilot for a new idea and use the act structures and the tools and the characters if you haven't done that for a formulaic show you like? You can, but you're reinventing wheels when you could really study by writing those. And that's, they're never wasted, even if you never share them, just writing them and rewriting them. And the one thing, going back to your question, what people can do and get ready if they're
Mhm.
to be ready.
Mhm.
When I talked about 10 scripts, a lot of people write one script 10 times. That is not the same. And if you write a script and you rewrite it and you rewrite it and you don't share it and you don't get feedback, there's nothing wrong with going back to it.
Mhm.
And it may even be a page 1 rewrite, which by the way, I think everything is a page one rewrite. You get a note from somebody, if you put that note in
Oh, yeah.
insular, it may not track something. So,
Right.
so even if you don't change anything, you have to page one the entire script to make sure that that character change or that story change fits the script.
Yes.
Um, you can do a rewrite of a script, and that counted as two. But if you do the same script and never move on to another project, you, to me, that's not your 10.
And that's a hard pill for a lot of people, a lot of aspiring writers to swallow, because writing one script in of itself is a huge accomplishment, right? Like that's something
Even
that
a bad one.
a bad one. Yeah,
Yeah.
100%. But I mean, the truth of the matter is, and I had to get over that hurdle. I mean, 3, 4 years ago, when I wrote my first script, it was a huge deal to me. But I thought at that time, because I didn't have any reference point, I thought it was the best script ever. And then at this point, when I look back after how many scripts I've written, whatever, I'm like, wow. But you get to see the growth there,
But
you
it
know?
was the best script you had written to that point.
Right.
And when Rich and I wrote feature after feature after feature, which was my favorite? I mean, they're all our children,
Yeah.
but that was also why I became a writer too. I briefly thought about acting in high school, and then I decided no. And I also, somebody would have decided that for me. And then I also decided, you're rejecting me if I go to act and you don't hire me. You're rejecting my kids if you pass on my script. It's a little bit less
True.
sincere.
I went to college for acting. That's what I thought I wanted to do. And same thing. There's something about it, just that little bit of separation there. Still painful, very
Not
painful,
as, yeah.
but not as. Yeah, yeah. So,
But
going to more of like the business end of things.
yeah,
I know that you have a grasp on distribution, marketing, and all these kinds of things that filmmakers, especially, I'm talking from a filmmaker point of view for the most part. I love writing. I'm a writer director, but
yeah.
filmmaking is really my main passion. Um, a lot of people, whether actors, writers, uh, filmmakers, they don't understand. I mean, for a long time, especially, I'm sure when you were first coming out to LA, a lot of that stuff wasn't transparent. I'm curious
Right.
as far as how, I mean, nowadays, and I feel like it's really only been in the last maybe 3 years where I've really started to be able to get some access to information just because of what's online. But I'm curious as to how you learn that stuff for yourself, and just kind of in broad strokes, what you might advise people to look into or just kind of get an understanding of beyond just the craft of things.
Well, the obvious is getting a job in the industry and working. Whether, again, I worked on a TV show, then I worked at a studio and Paramount Pictures motion picture story department, then I worked for a producer. And I made the conscious choice then also. I was working for a feature producer, so I wrote for TV so I wouldn't be exposed to ideas that were overlapping.
Yeah.
Working in those offices and connecting with your colleagues who are all looking for those jobs too, and sharing those experiences is a wealth of information. And you have to be curious about it and maybe ask questions, but you you can read books, but it doesn't necessarily tell you how a deal actually comes to be. You work at an agency, you're on the phone listening to
Right.
the calls. You work with a
Right.
producer. You there's nobody gives you permission to go do your job. You just have to do it.
Yeah.
And I worked alongside people who were like, I have a college degree. I'm too good to photocopy. And I was like, I have a college degree. Every one of my pages is copied straight. I mean, nobody would count their pages. And you said this is before PDFs, right? We're
Yeah.
sending out paper scripts with brads and three-hole punch. That's a skill to do it through and to do it well. And so to learn about foreign sales, to learn about distribution, to learn about, there's a very big difference between the independent film world and the studio film world.
Yeah.
And it also comes down to what you want. And if you're creating a film in order to be a blockbuster in theaters or Academy Award or on TV, then that's the industry. You definitely could do independent things, and you can do them so much more economically now.
Yeah.
So My
Yeah.
writing partner was cinematographer for my student thesis film. It cost $1,000 a minute. I don't know what his cost.
Oh
He
my
also did
God.
one. Did a
Yeah.
16 millimeter film, negative cutting. You hire an outsourced company to cut the negative to your work print, because if you scratch it, you've lost everything. Um, and it was a short werewolf comedy that was fun to make and educational. But then that same expense, Ken's got broadcast quality camera and editing software
Yeah.
and making award-winning shows that he can distribute now. Distribution is a big change. So in 2008, that was a game changer with all on-demand publishing
Right.
and the ability to distribute books without necessarily working with the traditional publishers. And a lot of major authors decided it was more lucrative to work that way. Film is getting to where you can distribute, but there's always the one thing is you always have to read a contract. I know people who enter contests. I read a contract, the agreement, the release form for the contest, and if it says certain things in there, I'm like, it's not worth it. It's not even about the fee. It's, I'm not going to sign something that releases everything I ever create to you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like you might get like $100 and then they get full ownership of your thing and can do whatever they want.
Sure. Sure. And you think about it, and these are life lessons. Not everybody tells people this, because different people have different skills and backgrounds. You're buying real estate, you're buying a car, you're getting a job, you're writing a script, you're working in entertainment. Don't sign a contract if it doesn't say what you expect it to say.
Right.
And if it's like, oh, don't worry about that, we're never going to enforce it. Okay, then let's not sign it. Now, I just said before, you're working with a partner, you better sign an agreement.
Yeah.
I still stand by that,
Yeah.
but don't sign an agreement that somebody says they have all the rights to your idea, or talk about the terms.
The amount of filmmakers, especially, that have just been screwed over by predatory distributors, it's like the majority. It's not even like a rare occurrence. It's like,
so unfortunately, but keep in mind, again, percentage wise, the people who have a roofer come and spray their roof and take money from them, or a car dealership who fixes a car and doesn't really. We have fraud all over. We have people taking advantage all over.
Yeah,
I don't know that it's a bigger percentage,
yeah,
but it is a target because people are dreaming and they take advantage of that dream. And if it's too good to be true, probably. Maybe.
And you go through all the lengths of raising money, and which is the hardest part, and then making the film, and then you enter into some festival, and then this distributor approaches you, and then you're like, oh wow, I can pass this thing off, like this is what I've been wanting this whole time. You're exhausted. That's where they get you. It's like, but I mean, if you've gone through all this work to get to this point, why would you at this last stage of the game just
right. No. Well, and that's doing the research, that's meeting the distributors, that's looking at what it really means to be a distributor. And again, the deal point, as a writer, I've been asked to do free work often. And early on, I mean, we were in the Writers Guild. You don't do free work. It was an easy answer. You have to pay me something. It has to be contracted. You have to be a guild signatory. I do think it's worth writing on spec. I've always told people, if you're going to write you talked about being a producer. The way to be a producer is you have to have a project. You have to have IP. If you have money, you go buy it from somebody. If you don't have money, go write it, create it. The agreements, so chain of title, if you don't have the agreements to own the script when it comes time to sell it where it needs to be sold, could kill a project. And it's the boring parts of it, the paperwork, but it is so important. And if you've got a project that you own, or if somebody comes to you and says, I have a great idea, will you write it? Sure, let's do an agreement. I'm going to write it on spec. I own it. You have 3 months to try and sell it. You have 6 months. You have 18 months. If you don't sell it, I own it. I have a writing sample out of it. I have your notes to help me edit it. I have that experience. And the other thing, at a certain point, it's like, well, why don't you pay me something? could be modest. Well, I can't pay you anything. How are you going to raise money to make a movie if you can't even pay a $5,000 option or $1,000 option? Or,
Right.
if, and it's, you don't want to believe that it's not real, because there is a currency to just being in demand, to having someone think you're worth scamming, that they're going to come to you and ask you to do that. It's,
It's
enjoy it for
flattering.
what it is. It is. Yeah. But you can gracefully say, I'd really like to. This is why agents and managers are earn their money. You have to, my agent won't let me. You have to do it. Now, the WGA, all of the ownership stuff a few years ago, fire the agents, all of that, that's changed a lot. But I always hear how people are, my agent didn't do anything for me. I had to get all my own work. Well, you got your own work because a producer read it because you said, can I have my agent send it over?
Right.
And the agent agreed to sign you because you did enough work that they read something and they felt that your work was pre-approved.
Right.
So it's a cost of doing business.
Yeah.
And, if your expectation's unrealistic, you're going to be let down. But if you find that business partner, because not every writer is a business person. So I'm steering it to writing again, switching it back to business. If you're more business minded and you're not a writer, throw a rock, you will find a writer.
Sure.
You'll find a ton of writers. Be decent to them. If you're not WGA signatory yet, you don't need to follow that, but give them a fair deal. Give them a payout if it gets made.
I'd love to touch on this. Hey, this project you got in pre-pro, Magister Fabulae. Is that how you pronounce it? Or am I messing it up?
That's a new title. So Ken and I were hired. This is the friend who was looking for a writer and came to us. And at the time, it was called The Nemesis. And it's a great project, but it is it needs to have some rights taken care of.
Okay.
And it needs to find some funding.
Yeah.
Max Leonida, who wrote the original script and is a director, very, very talented, can definitely deliver the project at a incredibly, low budget. And it's a psychological thriller. So, and what was fun about that for us is we came in to offer a take on a rewrite and just really got to shine with a script that he got a lot of a lot of people said this is a really great script. Excellent. So that was fun to write. I'm not, the next stage of it, I don't know where it goes.
So, I mean, that's something great to touch on because, me and Ken, we're basically at the same place for our stuff. Definitely lower scale. I tend to love the lower budget horror stuff. That's just my niche, right? But, first, I just want to mention, you brought up that stuff used to be so much more expensive. I think it's interesting that people still use as reference points, like even Paranormal Activity, that was made for like $15K, and you could make that film now for probably like, $500. So it's like give or take a few.
Right.
But and that, and then Blair Witch Project for $60K. It's like, what could you make that for? Same exact film. What could you make it for now?
Right.
But
it's the marketing.
Yeah.
It's a fortune is spent in the marketing.
Yes.
And convincing the company to market it or marketing it yourself,
right,
becomes the game changer.
Absolutely. So. I agree 100%, especially in the indie space. Marketing is key. And typically, even if you get with a distributor who's like, yeah, we have this, marketing cap and we're going to, you can't trust any of that. You got to act in a way that's like, they're not going to do anything just in case.
And I don't know. I mean, people always say, if you make a really quality project, people will find it. Don't forget, It's a Wonderful Life
Mm.
was a failure when it was made. It was so determined to be a failure, they didn't renew the copyright. So the fact that it was public domain and shown every holiday for free, yes, it was a great movie, but it wasn't recognized at the time. And it's one of
Mhm.
my favorites,
Oh yeah.
one of many people's favorites. But the the value of it, there are classic movies. I mean, even Heaven's Gate it closed down United Artists, I believe. I mean, it was considered a financial flop, if I'm
Really?
remembering the players.
That's one of my
And yet,
favorites. Yeah.
yeah. So it's I guess it becomes, you have to define what success is,
Mm.
and you need a roadmap of where you want to go. If you want a movie and you want it released, you need funding, you need a distributor, you need a platform, you need to make it, you need to edit it. And that's where these other people can come in,
Yeah.
and the deal, if you've put everything into it, but you're not going to have a lawyer look at the deal for your distribution. I love and learned about it, UCLA Extension Entertainment Finance course I took. Love
Great.
learning about collection agents. And they're basically escrow for film. And, if you work in real estate, you know how important it is to have the escrow agent, to have this third party collect all these fees so that your distributor sales agent isn't collecting everything and giving you what you want, is meaningful. And even that business is, I've heard, uh, challenged, because now we have the streamers who they fund it. They don't need a collection agent if they're just funding a movie, right? And they own it, or
Right.
whatever the deal is.
Right. Because we'll get into the getting the money and fundraising in that end in just a bit, but I'm curious first to talk about the marketing side of things. Let's just have a hypothetical here, and you're going total indie. Are there any tactics or strategies, or how would you even attack that front on, let's say you have this great indie film that you made, super proud of it, you got the funding, looks great. How would you even approach that?
Um, so that's not something I've been in. I worked for a producer who did a great movie. We brought it to Sundance. I saw that whole experience.
Cool.
I saw how hard it was. Um, I've I've been part of, in some way, a few independent films, and I got to tell you, name actors who made their independent movie will never produce their own movie again, because of that. And part of it is, you have to look at why you're producing your own movie. And if you're producing your own movie because nobody else will make it, you may be right. Maybe it is the next amazing thing. To me, making your low budget movie is a stepping stone to then being given the reins at a studio.
Mm.
So it's not, yes, it helps if it makes all of its money back, and it helps if it pays its investors back, because then they invest again. And there's definitely a widget component to movies, whether it's Hallmark holiday movies or,
Right.
scary, where they need content. And if you produce the content for 250,000 and somebody gives you 500,000, you've doubled your money.
Yeah.
Not everything needs to be a home run, and you've built up your library. And so the marketing of it, I've always been amazed looking at television,
Mm-hmm.
and specifically commercial television. And when I was a kid, I was anxious and stressed out because I never bought the toothpaste they advertised. I never bought the cereal they advertised. And I was like, commercial television is going to go away. And eventually it did. And now it's back with AVOD, right?
Yeah,
So,
completely.
but watch a network sometime, and you'll see how many of the advertising spots are being burned internally for their own programming,
Interesting.
right? Or their own studio movie. And there's a value to this. And we hear about what it costs to be a commercial at the Super Bowl.
Mm-hmm.
And that's valuable because people tune in to see the commercial. And, I don't know social media like other people. And obviously it's integral right now to any kind
Right.
of marketing campaign.
Right.
But what I would say is, I do believe the notion of, let's get a viral marketing campaign, let's get all this interest. I do think you have to create something amazing. It
Mm-hmm.
doesn't mean it will sell, But if it's not amazing, then even when it sells, it won't do what it needs to do.
For sure.
And if you're creating a pet rock, and by the way, I love those, and those kind of fads I think are good. For every pet rock, you have stupid fads that made a ton of money. And if all you're chasing is money, entertainment may not be the career to go in,
Yeah.
because you can spend the same hours every day, possibly in law, possibly in investments, possibly in, you know, there are different careers. If
Right.
you need to create, it's, you know, who's going to complain about making a movie instead of working in fast food? And I going to go back to really quick. You'd asked about starting out.
Yeah.
If you move here, you can work in the industry and learn, but it will be very tiresome. If you're writing, you may not have time to write. But if you're producing, you need to meet people.
Mhm.
If you want to be a writer, you don't. There's very limited room to write about entertainment. We have Swimming with Sharks. We have, all of Entourage, right? It's a
Yeah.
very insular business,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
if you're going to write about life, you have to live it. So
Right.
go work at a department store, and you're
Right.
going to have more stories to write about and
Absolutely.
bring. And I would look to people like Clerks, right? I'd look to films like that,
Mhm.
and people who just made things. And what always amazed me, Abram Zucker made Kentucky Fried Movie, and they did their vignettes, and it grew. Robert Townsend did Hollywood Shuffle. These films that got made were because people wouldn't take no, and they went out and did it, but they still did it with, they didn't just make the movie without any distribution or without a plan for distribution
Right.
in most cases. I think there are some, and the rule of thumb, just like I said, you're writing for television, you got to read every script, you got to watch every show, you have to know what's been done. If you're marketing a movie, I wouldn't try and market every movie in the world. I would focus on horror, or I would focus on comedy, which, by the way, doesn't travel internationally as well. Focus on action thriller, and pick the one you're going to do, because then you learn it, then you know who distributes it, you
Yeah.
know who finances it, you know what it needs,
Yeah.
and you make those widgets. And if you try and say, but it's not a product, you're swimming upstream. You're
Mm.
you're delivering a product. Just try and deliver the best one.
Mhm.
It's, if you wanted to be a restaurateur and you were going to go open a restaurant, you wouldn't say, but I'm not going to serve food. New concept, restaurant without food. You're making a movie.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
have to decide who it's meant for. The rule of thumb for indie was always, I'm going to make the movie and get it into a festival, and someone's going to buy it there.
Yeah.
That's a
That might have
risk.
worked in the 90s, right? But, like, yeah, people are still looking at that and thinking that it's modern day.
That is I'm not going to say go do NFTs, which people are trying to fund movies with now, or are funding movies. But what I will say is, instead of looking at what was done before,
Mm.
think about the way later to do
Yeah.
it. And again, I've got a little bit of experience with marketing books, not a lot of money coming in. I love the theory of, you don't sell books in a bookstore. People walk in a bookstore and there's everything to choose from, and not everything is even in stock. If
Right.
you're going to sell your book, go to a school, go to a corporation, and have a book
Yeah.
that speaks to something they need. I love things like Chicken Soup for the Soul, which is now an entertainment conglomerate, started with creating a book that brought in viewpoints from all of these other people, which is a built-in audience. So you're going to make a movie, cast it with actors who have a
Yep.
social media following, who are going to market it
Mhm.
on their following, because the movie fits their following. Because all of those are just things to decide, and there's nothing wrong with deciding you're going to make a movie that is needed by a venue, by an actor, by a subject matter, as opposed to, I'm going to create this one thing and force it into. You can do that, but you have to find where it fits.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
if we can pivot slightly, you mentioned earlier on about reps and just your
Yeah,
experience with reps. There is this notion of some people who come out here who are fresh, who feel like once they're accepted by a rep, they can kind of chill out, everything's taken
never.
care of. And ultimately, like what I've heard, in these conversations, uh, they'll sometimes work your list, when you get up with a rep. And so it's
They want
like
to know your fans.
they
They
want to
want
know
to know, and you've got to have fans. You have to have people who've read your stuff and like it to even get to them.
right. Do you feel like there is a time where you're not ready for a rep? And then when you are, how do you know you're ready for a rep? And how would you go about approaching that whole thing? Do you feel like it's them kind of coming to you, or what are your thoughts on that?
That's a great question, and let me answer it, and then we'll wrap up this. But happy again to schedule another.
Absolutely.
Um, so there's a lot of people, and I would agree, that kind of say, don't worry about a rep. When you're ready, they'll come to you. And I don't think it's that logical. And they need to know you. They need to know you're out there. You need to market your stuff, but you never market your stuff until it is perfect. It
Right.
has to be perfect. It doesn't matter if the movies you see are crap or the TV shows you see are crap and you're like, I can write that badly. You don't get to
Mhm.
until you're in that position.
Yeah.
You have to write every word gold. The two things that took me a while to learn was that everything has to need a place in there. And I was like, the word the or a, what does this mean? But when you're dealing with a constrained 100-page script, you don't do a 200-page comedy.
Right.
It's not the format. If people will look at the last page, they won't read it.
Yeah.
Um, so every scene, every page needs to serve the project. And the only way to know that's happening is by having other people read it who give you an honest opinion. Your mom, unless she's a producer, shouldn't be the one giving you an opinion. It should be somebody who I prefer criticism to
Yeah.
compliments.
Yeah.
Somebody who tells me this is great and isn't writing a check isn't doing me any favors.
For
Somebody who tells me this would be better if I may not do their note, but if I hear 6 times the same problem, I
Mhm.
will fix that character. So you need to fix all that stuff. Rich and I, and Ken and I too, we bring actors over, give them pizza, and we read the script out loud. We hear it out loud, and that's
I
and
love
and we
that.
do it cold. We don't send it to them to prepare their part
Yeah.
because a studio executive is not going to read through it and prepare the part and then go back to read it. They're going to read it cold, and if they misread it, they're going to set it down and move on.
Mhm.
So when you're ready, because people are reading your script and saying this is really good, can I show it to my friend, I know somebody, that does happen. When you're ready to solicit an agent or a manager, you have to have at least one script that's gold. The
Right.
other thing that took me a long time to learn was write what you know. Like, how does George Lucas know space opera? And how did it's the themes of life,
Yes.
the themes of love and hate and jealousy and friendship and all of these things to put in your characters real feelings
Right.
and wear your heart on your sleeve. That has to come across in the page. You have to know those things by experiencing them, and you have to know in your own character what you're writing about. It doesn't mean you have to be a deep sea diver to write about a deep sea diver,
Right.
but I've always loved research. I love the entree that writing. When I worked at Paramount, we got a tour of a prison because there was a script being written about a prison. And I met Lloyd, the parapsychologist, because there was a script that never got made that was about a paranormal character. And so I was tasked with researching and finding the best parapsychologist to be an expert consultant. So I think when you know it's ready, you get one chance for anybody who agrees to read it to read it.
Right.
And so I wouldn't burn everyone. Like, if somebody's willing to read it and they don't respond to you or they respond to you negatively, don't argue with them. I've seen a lot of people do that, you
Wow.
know, and there is something to following up and being like, did you like it enough? Can I send you my next one? Or do you have some notes? Can I, incorporate them and send you the next one? And but it's rare that you're going to get two reads from
For
somebody.
sure. Yeah.
So so that's okay because there's nobody who can say you'll never work in this town again. There's so many producers, there's so many agents, there's so many managers. I do think it's easier to get your stuff read by a producer,
Mm,
and then it is really true. If a producer likes your work and buys it from you and makes a movie and you're in a festival, then agents will come to you.
right.
So
Absolutely.
so you don't need the agent until you need them. And again, if your expectation, they do get work for you
Yeah.
simply because they know the open assignments and they can put you up for them. But you have to do your homework for them. You have to be a brand they can represent.
Yep.
You have to have a sample and deliver. So
Absolutely. Hey,
yeah.
I cannot thank you enough for your time. Seriously, I've wanted to do a deep dive with you for forever now, and I'm so glad that we finally got to do it.
Yeah, thanks for
There's
having me.
so many truth bombs in here that are incredibly helpful to me, and I know it'll be helpful to other people too. So I really appreciate you.
Well, thanks for having me and look forward to watching your next project.
Definitely have a great night. We'll talk soon.
You
Okay.
too. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Take care.